After the death of Moses, the Lord spoke to Joshua, the servant who had faithfully assisted him for many years. The Israelites stood at the edge of the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey, yet divided by strong cities and walls too high for ordinary men to scale. God's voice was clear. He had chosen Joshua to lead his people into the inheritance he had promised to their forefathers. "Be strong and courageous," the Lord commanded, "for you shall bring the people of Israel into the land I promised them. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for I am with you wherever you go." Joshua gathered the leaders of the tribes and spoke to the people, reminding them of all that God had done, bringing them out of Egypt, guiding them through the wilderness, and sustaining them with manna from heaven. The people listened with reverence, their hearts filled with hope and fear alike, for they knew that the cities before them, especially Jericho, were formidable and fortified. Joshua sent 2 spies secretly into Jericho, instructing them to observe the city and report its strength. The spies returned with courage, inspired not by their own strength, but by God's protection. Rahab, a woman of the city, had hidden them and acknowledged the Lord's power, declaring her faith that the God of Israel would give the city into Joshua's hands. In return for her faith, the spies promised her and her family safety when the Lord delivered Jericho. Meanwhile, the people of Israel prepared for a miraculous act of obedience. Joshua conveyed God's instructions for taking the city. They were to march around Jericho once a day for 6 days, with 7 priests carrying trumpets before the Ark of the Covenant. On the 7th day, they were to march 7 times, and the priests were to blow the trumpets. God's promise was simple yet profound. The city would fall, not by might or power, but by the hand of the Lord. Joshua's leadership was steady and resolute. He encouraged the people, reminding them that their inheritance was assured by God's word. The strength of Jericho's walls was no match for the obedience of a people guided by the Almighty. Every man, woman, and child prepared to follow his instructions faithfully, trusting in the God who had parted the Red Sea and provided for them in the wilderness. This moment marked a turning point for Israel. No longer were they wanderers in the desert. They were heirs to a promised land, called to act in faith, trusting God's guidance even when the instructions seemed unusual or the obstacles insurmountable. Joshua's example inspired courage, showing that victory belongs to those who obey God with steadfast hearts. The camp was filled with anticipation and prayer. Joshua consecrated the people, reminding them that the Lord was their shield and their deliverer. As the sun set over the plains before Jericho, a quiet resolve settled over the Israelites. They would follow God's command, march around the city, and witness the power of the Lord at work. In that moment, the faith of Israel was tested and strengthened, not by swords or armies, but by trust in God's perfect plan. The stage was set for a miracle, a demonstration of God's faithfulness that would echo through generations as a testament to the power of obedience and divine guidance. The next morning, the people of Israel rose early, their hearts steady with trust in the Lord. Joshua instructed them to follow God's command exactly. The Ark of the Covenant, symbol of God's presence, was placed at the forefront, carried by the 7 priests. Their steps were deliberate, their hearts filled with faith, though their eyes beheld a city that seemed impossible to conquer. For 6 days, the Israelites marched around Jericho once each day. The people followed silently, their movements precise, while the priests blew trumpets of ram's horns, a sound that reminded them of the Lord's power and presence. The walls of the city rose high, yet the Israelites trusted that God's plan was greater than human strength. Inside Jericho, the inhabitants watched with growing anxiety, Rumors spread among the people that the God of Israel was among them, that a miraculous act was unfolding outside their walls. Fear took root, for they knew that no ordinary army could defeat a city fortified so heavily. The walls of Jericho, which had withstood human siege for generations, now trembled in the hearts of those who witnessed the faithful obedience of God's people. Joshua encouraged the people at the close of each day, reminding them that the battle belonged to the Lord. "Do not be discouraged," he said. "Our God fights for us, and his promise is sure. Keep walking, keep trusting, for the victory is his to give." The Israelites continued with quiet determination, their footsteps echoing the rhythm of obedience, their faith tested but unwavering. Rahab, the woman who had sheltered the spies, watched with hope and faith. Her actions, rooted in belief in the God of Israel, now intertwined with the unfolding plan. She and her family awaited the fulfillment of the promise made to her, safety and deliverance. Her faith, though from outside Israel, demonstrated that God's power reaches beyond the borders of nations, touching hearts that trust him. On the seventh day, Joshua spoke to the people with renewed authority. "Today, you will march around the city 7 times, he instructed. "The priests would blow their trumpets, and the people would shout at my command. The Lord has promised that this is the way Jericho will fall, and we must obey fully, without hesitation." The Israelites obeyed. 7 times they circled the city, the sound of trumpets filling the air, the rhythm of faith resounding with every step. The people's hearts beat with anticipation and trust. They had no walls of iron themselves, no battering rams or siege towers. Their weapon was faith, their shield the presence of God. As they completed the 7th circuit, Joshua commanded the people to shout. A great shout went up, a sound carried by generations of hope and divine promise. The ground trembled at the power of the Lord, and the walls of Jericho fell flat, as God had spoken. Victory came not by might or human strategy, but by obedience and trust in the Almighty. The Israelites moved swiftly into the city, claiming it as the Lord had instructed. Every action, from the march to the trumpet's blast to the final shout, was a testimony to God's faithfulness. They obeyed his word without hesitation, and the miraculous deliverance demonstrated the truth that God's plan always prevails. In that moment, the people of Israel learned a profound lesson. Faith in God is the most powerful force, obedience the greatest weapon, and trust the surest path to victory. Joshua's leadership and their steadfastness became a legacy, a story told for generations to come, showing that the Lord fulfills his promises in his perfect time. The 7th day dawned with anticipation heavier than the morning before. Joshua's voice carried authority as he instructed the people to follow the Lord's plan precisely. The priests lifted the Ark of the Covenant, and the Israelites prepared to march around Jericho 7 times. Though the city walls loomed, their faith remained steadfast. With each circuit, the people's steps echoed in solemn rhythm, the trumpets sounding boldly. The air was filled with the scent of dust and the murmur of countless hearts in prayer and expectation. The Israelites knew that the Lord's presence had already moved within their midst. Their obedience, though simple in action, carried immense power because it was rooted in faith. Inside Jericho, the inhabitants whispered in fear. Their fortified walls had withstood generations, yet these people moved without haste, without siege engines, trusting a God whose power they could not see. Anxiety spread like wildfire, for the city's defenders understood that something beyond human might was at work. As the 7th circuit neared its completion, Joshua commanded the people to raise a great shout to the Lord. He proclaimed, "The Lord has given you the city." With one voice, the Israelites shouted, and the sound carried through the streets, across the walls, and into the hearts of all who heard. At that moment, the Lord's power manifested in a way that defied human expectation. The walls, built tall and strong, trembled and collapsed. The earth shook beneath the feet of the faithful, and Jericho fell into the hands of Israel, exactly as the Lord had promised. Victory came not by human strength, but by complete obedience and trust in the Almighty. Joshua ordered the city to be devoted to the Lord. Everything in its people, livestock, and treasures was consecrated as God's possession, a reminder that the victory had been his alone. Yet Rahab and her family were spared, just as promised. She had acted in faith to protect the spies, and her trust in God's word was honored. She joined the people of Israel, a living witness that God's mercy reaches all who place their hope in Him. The fall of Jericho became a defining moment in Israel's history, a story passed from generation to generation. It was not simply the destruction of a city, but a demonstration of God's faithfulness to those who obey. Joshua's leadership, guided by divine instruction, and the people's steadfast faith showed that God's plans are accomplished through trust, courage, and obedience rather than human might. As the dust settled, Joshua consecrated the city's remains and reminded the people of their responsibility. Remember that it is the Lord who gives victory. Let this day be a testimony that God's word cannot fail. Obedience brings blessing, and faith brings triumph. The Israelites' hearts were full of awe, recognizing the power of God at work among them. They had witnessed a miracle, a clear demonstration that following the Lord's commands, even when they seem unconventional, leads to fulfillment of His promises. The memory of Jericho would forever stand as a symbol of God's sovereignty and faithfulness. Through this event, the people learned that no obstacle is insurmountable when God is their guide. The fall of Jericho illustrated the principle that God fights for His people and that obedience rooted in faith accomplishes what human hands alone cannot. From that day forward, the story of Jericho echoed in Israel, a tale of courage, trust, and the miraculous power of God fulfilling His promises. Joshua's words and leadership inspired future generations to remember that with God, the seemingly impossible becomes reality. After the miraculous fall of Jericho, the Israelites paused to witness the Lord's faithfulness and to honor His commands. Among the survivors was Rahab, the woman who had hidden the spies in her home. Her actions had saved not only herself and her family, but also demonstrated the power of faith in God. Rahab welcomed the spies into her home, trusting in the God of Israel, a God she had not yet fully seen, but whose deeds she had heard of and believed. Her house, marked with a scarlet cord, stood as a symbol of obedience and trust. The scarlet cord was simple, yet it represented the promise of protection and deliverance given by the Lord through the spies. In it, her entire family found safety from the destruction that befell Jericho. The Israelites, led by Joshua, advanced beyond Jericho with caution and care. Their confidence was not in their swords or strength, but in the God who had already given them victory. Joshua reminded the people that God's hand guided each step, that obedience to His commands was the key to triumph, and that faith must continue in the coming battles for the land of Canaan. Rahab's faith became an example of the truth that God's salvation extends beyond Israel to all who believe. She and her family were incorporated into the community of Israel, a living testimony that God rewards those who act in trust and obedience. Rahab's courage was honored for generations. Her story, a bridge between the nations, demonstrating that faith, even from outside God's chosen people, is never overlooked. As the Israelites moved forward, they encountered other cities, fortified and defended. But the memory of Jericho encouraged them. They remembered how obedience, faith, and reliance on God had brought down a city that seemed unconquerable. Joshua emphasized that God's victories are achieved not by human wisdom, but by following His guidance faithfully. The people also began to understand the principle of consecration, that victories and possessions belong first to the Lord. Everything in Jericho had been devoted to Him, except what He spared. This act reminded the Israelites that God's blessings are gifts, not rights earned by might alone. They were stewards of His provision, called to act in obedience and gratitude. Rahab herself embraced this new life among the Israelites, learning the ways of God and witnessing the unfolding of His promises firsthand. Her faith had saved her, but it also became a model for others, illustrating that trust in the Lord brings not only protection, but also purpose. God's plans often intersect with human courage, and Rahab's story was a living proof that even small acts of faith can have eternal consequences. Joshua continued to lead the people, ensuring that each step taken in Canaan was guided by divine instruction. The advance beyond Jericho was careful, measured, and obedient, showing that victories are preserved when God's word is followed faithfully. The Israelites built on the lessons learned. Trust, obedience, and reliance on God were more powerful than any walls or armies. By honoring Rahab and following God's commands, Israel strengthened its community and faith. Every member of the nation, from leader to common laborer, witnessed the Lord's power at work and learned that His promises are reliable. Rahab's inclusion reminded them that God's grace is available to all who turn toward Him with sincere hearts. Thus, the advance after Jericho was not merely a military action, but a demonstration of God's sovereignty and the blessings of faith. Joshua's leadership, combined with the obedience of the people and the courage of Rahab, ensured that the Israelites remained steadfast in their mission to claim the land God had promised. With Jericho behind them, the Israelites pressed forward under Joshua's leadership, their hearts strengthened by the Lord's miraculous intervention. The fall of Jericho had not only demonstrated God's power, but also reinforced a vital lesson. Victory comes through faith, obedience, and reliance on His guidance rather than human strength. Joshua called the leaders of Israel together and reminded them of God's promise. The Lord your God goes before you. He will deliver every city into your hands, just as He delivered Jericho. Be strong and courageous, and do not be afraid. Obey His commands, and the land will be yours. The Israelites began to conquer the cities of Canaan, city by city. Each battle required careful adherence to God's instructions. Some cities, like Ai, posed unique challenges. The first attempt to take Ai ended in defeat, for Israel had acted without fully following God's plan. Joshua humbled himself, sought the Lord, and received instruction to remove sin from the camp and obeyed God's strategy precisely. Once the Israelites acted in complete obedience, Ai fell, and the people of Israel gained confidence that God's guidance, not their own strength, determined success. They realized that victories were not granted by weapons alone, but by aligning themselves fully with God's commands. The Israelites continued to advance, their faith growing with each city that fell before them. As they conquered more towns, the pattern was clear. The Lord was their protector, provider, and commander. Joshua reminded the people to devote conquered cities to the Lord, as he had instructed at Jericho, ensuring that the victories honored God's holiness. The Israelites learned to celebrate victories with gratitude, acknowledging that every success was a testament to God's faithfulness. The spies and scouts provided reports of the lands ahead, and Joshua used these to guide the people strategically, always seeking God's instruction first. The Lord's presence was visible in the outcomes. Victories were decisive. Enemies fled or surrendered, and the Israelites took possession of the land promised to their forefathers. Rahab's family remained with Israel, a living reminder of God's mercy and the importance of faith in His promises. Their inclusion in the community of Israel highlighted a truth that transcended generations. God honors trust and courage, even from those outside the covenant, and integrates them into His divine plan. Throughout these campaigns, Joshua emphasized that the Israelites' strength was in their unity and obedience. The people moved not for personal gain but to fulfill God's promise. Remembering the lessons of Jericho, every wall can fall, every obstacle can be overcome, when God leads and His people obey. By the end of this phase of conquest, Israel had established a foothold in Canaan. Each city taken was more than a military victory. It was a testament to God's power, a demonstration that faith, patience, and obedience are instruments of divine blessing. The Israelites learned that God's plans are perfect, that His timing is unerring, and that trusting Him fully produces results beyond human expectation. Joshua's leadership, combined with the people's obedience, ensured that God's covenant continued to unfold. The advance through Canaan was steady, disciplined, and faithful. Israel's victories illustrated a principle that would echo throughout their history. When the Lord fights for His people, no wall is too high, no city too strong, and no promise too great to fulfill. With each city that fell, the Israelites' faith deepened, their reliance on God intensified, and their understanding of obedience became sharper. They witnessed the unfolding of God's promise, learning that the land, the blessings, and the victories belonged first to Him. After the victories in Jericho and the surrounding cities, Joshua gathered the people of Israel to reaffirm the Lord's covenant. The conquest of Canaan was not only a military campaign, it was the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Lord reminded Joshua and the people that the land belonged to him, and the Israelites were stewards of His blessings. Joshua spoke to the assembly, saying, "The Lord your God has given you this land. It is not by your power or might, but by His hand that you possess it. Remember His commandments, obey His law, and serve Him faithfully. For He is your God and your deliverer." The people listened intently, understanding that their inheritance was tied to obedience and faithfulness. God's covenant with Israel was made visible through the division of the land. Each tribe received its allotted portion, as God had instructed through Moses. The Levites, chosen to serve in the tabernacle, were given cities rather than a territory, emphasizing their dedication to the Lord and their role as spiritual guides for the nation. The boundaries of each tribal inheritance were carefully defined, a reminder that God's order and plan govern all things. Joshua oversaw the process with reverence, ensuring that the land was distributed fairly and in accordance with God's instructions. He reminded the leaders that the possession of the land was both a blessing and a responsibility. They were to live in obedience, uphold justice, and honor God in all aspects of life. The land, flowing with abundance, was a tangible sign of God's faithfulness and a reminder that blessings come through covenantal relationship with Him. The Levites and other leaders conducted ceremonies to dedicate the cities and towns, offering sacrifices of thanksgiving and praise. The people rejoiced, knowing that the Lord's promises had been fulfilled. Yet Joshua emphasized vigilance. The same God who had given them victory demanded continued faithfulness. Complacency or disobedience could undo the blessings they had received. The division of the land also served to unite the people of Israel under God's law. Each tribe recognized that while they held their own inheritance, they were part of a greater whole. bound together by covenant and guided by the Lord. Joshua reminded them, "Choose today whom you will serve. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." His words echoed across generations, establishing a model of devotion, leadership, and obedience. Through these acts, the Israelites witnessed God's faithfulness firsthand. The promise given to Abraham centuries before had now been realized in the land, the victories, and the order established among the tribes. Joshua's leadership exemplified trust, courage, and complete reliance on God's guidance, showing that human effort must always align with divine instruction for lasting success. Rahab's household, now integrated fully into Israel, continued as a living testimony that God honors faith. Her inclusion reminded the people that the Lord's grace extends to all who trust Him, and that obedience, coupled with faith, leads to blessing and protection. As the sun set over the newly divided land, Joshua led the people in prayer, dedicating their inheritance to the Lord. They acknowledged that the victories, the cities, and the land itself were gifts from God, and that stewardship, obedience, and reverence were their responsibilities. The covenant was not only a historical event, it was a living guide for all generations, a framework for relationship with God, and a reminder of His faithfulness. The Israelites now stood on the land promised by God, their hearts filled with awe and gratitude. Joshua's faithful leadership, combined with the people's obedience and God's unwavering guidance, had brought them to this pivotal moment. They had learned that God's promises are fulfilled in His time, that obedience brings victory, and that His covenant endures across generations. As the sun dipped below the hills of Canaan, Joshua gathered the people of Israel one final time. The land was conquered, the cities claimed, and the Lord's covenant fulfilled in a way that generations would remember. Joshua, now advanced in years, spoke with authority and reverence, knowing that his time as leader was drawing to a close. Today, Joshua declared, "You have witnessed the power of the Lord. He has delivered the cities into our hands, just as He promised." The walls of Jericho fell not by human strength, but by obedience and faith. Remember that it was the Lord who fought for us, and it is Him we must serve faithfully. The assembly listened intently. Fathers told their children of Rahab's courage and faith, of the miraculous fall of Jericho, and of the victories in the cities that followed. They recounted the guidance Joshua provided, the careful division of the land, and the reminders that the inheritance belonged to God first. Every word reinforced the importance of obedience, trust, and devotion. Joshua reminded the people that covenantal faithfulness was the key to maintaining their inheritance. "Choose whom you will serve," he said, echoing the words he had spoken many years before. "Will it be the Lord who has brought you this land, or will it be other gods? The choice is yours. But know that obedience to Him brings blessing, and turning from Him brings consequences." He urged the Israelites to teach their children diligently, to tell them of the mighty acts of God and the miracles they had witnessed. Joshua emphasized that faith must be passed from one generation to the next, and that the story of Jericho, the courage of Rahab, and the conquests across Canaan were more than history. They were lessons of trust, leadership, and divine faithfulness. As Joshua concluded, he set up a large stone as a witness, a tangible reminder of the covenant between the Lord and Israel. "This stone will stand as a testimony," he said, "that the Lord is God, that His word is true, and that obedience to Him brings life and blessing. Let future generations see it and remember the God who delivered us from our enemies." Joshua's final charge combined encouragement, warning, and inspiration. He reminded the people that God's presence would continue with them as long as they remained faithful. Victory, Prosperity and peace were gifts from the Lord, and stewardship, obedience, and worship were their duties in return. The people of Israel left the assembly strengthened in spirit and united in purpose. They had seen firsthand the Lord's power and guidance, from the fall of Jericho to the division of the land. Every battle, every act of faith, every step of obedience had been orchestrated by God, teaching them that human strength is limited, but God's power is limitless. Joshua's life became a model of courage, faith, and steadfast obedience. He led the people with wisdom, humility, and reverence, ensuring that every step taken in the promised land honored God. His legacy endured not in monuments or wealth, but in the hearts and minds of a nation taught to trust, obey, and follow the Lord faithfully. As Joshua passed from leadership, the Israelites remained on the land, their hearts anchored in God's covenant. They understood that the victories they had witnessed were not merely about conquering cities, but about walking faithfully with the Lord. The story of Jericho, Rahab, and the battles of Canaan would echo across generations, reminding all that obedience, trust, and faith in God bring triumph beyond human understanding. Thus, Joshua's life and leadership became a lasting testimony that God fulfills His promises, that obedience is the pathway to blessing, and that faith, when passed from one generation to the next, ensures the enduring presence and provision of the Lord. The Israelites entered a new era, guided by the lessons of faith, courage, and divine guidance, forever shaped by the mighty acts of God they had witnessed.